Charnabal blades. Lore and commentary will begin after a brief story to get us in the mood and show us what is to be discussed. From the Bald Library, Dishonored. They call me Hexamon. That is not my real name. A good thing they do not know this, or I would be a dead man. Well, if you can use that word to describe me anymore. A man. I am so much more than that now. I do not even refer to just being Astartes, a space marine, an angel of death. Few can see, none truly know. Ullik can. I believe that Tarax can as well. My brother's truer than any who have the same genes floating around their forms. But this also is a good thing. I would not want the rabble to stare at me, to try to emulate me. It would be cruel, you see, as they would all fail, of course. So it behooves them to not even try. A stream of thought only, a dream. I return to the moment. Before us are the enemy, sons of the lion, dark angels. They tout themselves as swordsmen. I shall savour this, all of it. Ah, things were so different then, during the crusade, the heresy, as it would later be called. We were men of honour then, even the cravens who still clung to the tyrant, the emperor. And this memory over all others makes me miss those times. Oh, I could have wiped the small citadel from the map with orbital bombardment. I could have arrayed my artillery outside the range of their defensive weapons and pulled a Tarax Antarax and just blasted them into submission or annihilation. Most likely the latter, as the sons of the lion would not surrender any more than we would, should the positions be reversed. So there was always that, I suppose. I could have filled Spartans and land raiders, and thundered across the plains and smashed down their walls, and put them to the sword. I did not. I instructed my herald to walk across the plain under the flag of truce, and there he conveyed my message, my challenge. They accepted, of course, as good little lions should. We arrayed ourselves for battle and waited. Then the doors to their modest bastille opened, and out they came to meet us, their pennants and banners raised high, fluttering in the winds. It almost seemed a pity to do this. Almost. And the two small contingents marched towards each other, kicking up dust and making a thoroughly glorious vision for all. I knew their numbers, so I did not take one man more. Not one. We had to beat them down. We had to prove that we were better than they were. I would have it recorded in my mind's eye for the rest of my life. Then I thought it might be short. So many dying in this war. Now, I marvel at the concept of fleeting mortality. Back to then, when we got to within a few 100 meters of each other, both sides began to pick up the pace and jog. Then we both broke into a run, and we clashed. I permitted the chaff to precede me. I wished to see where their hero was. He who had accepted this engagement must be given the gift of being slain by me personally. They deserved nothing less, after being such good sports. I surveyed the battlefield as our men engaged each other. The titanic clash of metal on metal as our lines met, it was like the chiming of cymbals to my ear. Pure joy. My men in the regal purple, theirs in the dour black of their order. Men died so swiftly on both sides. But there, I spotted a segment where they were not falling back, but pushing forward. In most regions across the field, my men clearly outmatched those of the Lion, driving them back with skill and precision to match against their raw power. And on this day, as with many others, skill won out. I walked to the scene of their push, taking out 3 of them as my men fell back before a hardened knot of what were clearly the Dark Angel's best. No Death or Dreadwing were they, and certainly not of the Knight Cenobium, but they were decorated veterans nonetheless. The first tried to take my head as a man in front of me died. I almost nonchalantly sidestepped his blow, drawing my plasma pistol and discharging it in his face. His head melted satisfyingly. The next came at me with his power sword in a thuggish overhead swing. If he had struck, he would have cleft me clean in twain. I stepped in and grabbed his forearms as he brought them down. The blade did not touch me, and I twisted him, making him lose footing. He went down to one knee, and I then bullied the sword downward, so that his own shoulder took it. The slow cutting into him made his face contort in pain, but he never stopped glaring into my eyes as I ended him. I took his blade and threw it into the chest of the last to assail me, the last to stand in my way. He looked so dumbfounded as he stared wide-eyed at the power blade now jutting out of his chest. He toppled over and died, and my path was now clear. He saw me. His bodyguard wanted to surround him, but he simply shook his head and then raised his sword at me. An unmistakable challenge. I bowed to him, then walked forward, drawing my Charnabal blade for the first time in the fray. He was worthy of its edge. At least, I hoped he was. While all around were screams and bellows, pain and battle, in this moment, just between the two of us, there was silence. Neither of us spoke as we paced around each other in a circle. Nobody on either side would interrupt this duel, many stopping their own clashes to stand and watch. He was a centurion. He had earned me as his foe. As we paced, he changed his stance a few times to match my own alterations. I brought the sword up, seeming to prepare for the heron style, then dropped again into a tight grip, shifting into the wall of frustration. But I watched as we shifted once and then twice more, then I smirked at him the whole time. I raised my eyebrow, stopped pacing around, and winked at him while waiting. This worked a treat, of course. He grimaced at the insult and ploughed towards me. His blows were structured, skillful, and swift. I danced backwards and sniggered as I had taken his measure. Then I skipped a few times and brought my blade up at him in great swirling circular strikes, each building on the previous, a tapestry of movement that he did not see developing until it was too late. His last block came up high against my feint, and my blade went through his midriff, enough to hurt, but not to kill. I drew it out and sprayed his blood back into his very face. At that point, I think he knew. We both did. His clumsy, sparkling power sword was no match for my Charnabal blade. Even so, he knew that even if I wielded an exact copy of his own sword, the result would be no different. Resigned, he came at me again. This time, the parries and feints were faster from both of us, but the exchange was shorter. as I ended with my blade finding the tiny slither of weakness in his knee armor. I took a slice off his knee, and in the dead time it created, where he was shocked for an instant by the initial pain, I brought up my blade and cut off the tip of his nose. And there was now silence around us. His men were no longer shouting encouragement. My own men knew what was happening. Few enjoyed this display, even now. Over the next minute, I danced around him, taking off a finger, removing a slither from his cheekbone, slicing through his leg and then back to his head, taking an eyebrow. He took it all as heroically as any I'd ever faced. Yet when he lurched at me in one last attempt to run his blade through my chest, I took off his sword hand and tripped him. He was Astartes, but he was grievously wounded now. He panted as I kicked him over onto his back and put my boot on his chest. Looking down on him, I took in every aspect of his face, now a bloody and brutalized thing. And before his men, I simply lowered my Charnabal blade into and then through his neck. With their lord gone, the fight went out of them, and the rest, that was just mop up. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and war gear of the 30K universe and Horus Heresy, where the era of knowledge and enlightenment has ended and the age of darkness has begun. And today, we shall be discussing the Charnabal weapons of the Legiones Astartes. The Charnabal blades are an oddity, and a valuable glimpse into so much of the world that was, just before the rising of the Emperor, the Unification Wars, and the subsequent Great Crusade. But what are they? How are they made? And who wielded them? Firstly, a Charnabal blade is akin to a very futuristic katana. Now, I do not hold that weapon in as much reverence as is currently all the rage, but it cannot be denied that they were, so to put it, a more elegant weapon for a very different age, but certainly not one that was more civilized. But why do I say that? Because of the way that they were forged. Charnabal weapons were not so much forged as delicately constructed over endless processes. Like the katana, the metals were folded again and again, beaten into a structure that was far more than the base quality of its materials would usually allow. For the katana was folded thus because of the lack of good quality iron to be found in that region. But the Charnabal blade was not created from subpar materials. No. They were made from the very best that could be provided, and the few true master smiths who created them were so refined, so meticulous, and so proud that they impressed their own style and details on any weapon so that another true master could discern the maker of the blade. The forging did not end with press stamping. Despite these blades being already astonishingly strong, light, perfectly balanced, and made of truly superior grade materials in the first instance, it was in their edge that the fullness of their power was gifted. For they were micro-serrated with a fractal sharp edge, meaning that they were as sharp as any of the most ludicrously dangerous weapons of even an Eldar. And in this way, they could slice through near anything. They did not require the energy supply of the power weapon, but in the hands of a master swordsman, they were every bit as deadly, if not more so. Coming in as many forms as the cultures that created them, there were swords, glaives, and even tabars, which is just a fancy word for an axe from the Middle East, usually used from a saddle. Thus there were Charnabal blades, swords, broadswords, tabars, glaives, and others. The Charnabal weapon had a certain mystique about it, as they were primarily used by the ruling elites of Terra, the denizens of Earth during Old Night. Used by dueling societies and assassins of the highest fee, the blades were irrevocably linked to the dying old aristocracy and the degeneracy that they epitomized in the minds of many. Seen as weapons of preening and pandering fops, many legions and their warriors would not wield such a blade, even if it were of superior quality to that which they found more natural, the chainsword and power weapons of the standard legions. For the Charnabal weapon was designed for speed and skill, and not power and aggression. Utterly unsurprisingly, there was one legion who used them as a sign of skill and felt that they had a grace that was in keeping with their self-image. You get no marks for guessing that it was, indeed, the Emperor's Children, the Third. Their own dueling societies inside the Legion made it the perfect weapon, as it was not seen as clumsy or unrefined or brutish as a power weapon used by near all else. But then, the Emperor's Children had no Legion cultural rejection of even Xenos weapons, if they were shown to be well made and had a certain look to them that would impress. As for everything else, it all came down to ego. In the search for perfection, the Emperor's Children would do near anything. Many of other legions used them, but never to the extent and with the natural acceptance, if not envy, as shown in the Third. In the hands of an amateur, the blade would be swift and sharp. In the hands of a master, it was the equal or even greater than anything created on Mars or blurted out from the armories and factories of the Crusade, because each weapon was lovingly created as a unique object of graceful destruction. And what Astartes would not want a weapon that had no copy in the entire galaxy? Pride. Again, the eternal curse that brings all low eventually. And they were lethal in combat, for their perfect balance and light weight were designed for the duel. And when a Marine with a power weapon faced off against one with a Charnabal blade, they had better hope that their guard was better than that of their foe. For the blades were whipped fast and could cut through the ceramite of power armor every bit as easily as a power weapon. And the Marine without such a blade would need to be naturally faster than his opponent if he even dreamt of surviving the encounter. It is no surprise that the Palatine blades, the elite of the Emperor's Children, had these weapons, or esoteric Xenos blades, as a matter of course. Now, one other formation was known to use these weapons as well. The highest echelons of the Sisters of Silence, and especially the Knights Abyssal, where their speed and skill were more useful than sheer might, so they could even match the dread Astartes in close quarters. But that is definitely a story for another time. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. If you've enjoyed this video, then do consider liking and then subscribing and pressing the notification button, as I would not want you to miss out. And do check out the video description for links to more entertainment opportunities. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.